So, thanks a lot. Well, my panel takes the stage. So I'm Karina Ricks. I'm a partner with Cityfy, which is a urban change consultancy. Prior to that, just some background. I was really fortunate to be able to serve as the Associate Administrator for Innovation at the Federal Transit Administration and serve two cities, Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh, in leading their transportation and infrastructure initiatives. So we're going to get going here. So let me introduce my panel to start with. So this is Justin Erbacci. Justin is the Chief Executive Officer for Los Angeles World Airports. That includes both LAX and Van Nuys General Aviation. He leads the team responsible for transforming LAX into a world-class airport for the modern traveler. He's also leading a $14 billion modernization program that'll revolutionize how guests access, move about, and are served by the airport. Justin first joined LAWA as Chief Innovation and Technology Officer in 2016. And he's also held a number of senior positions in the private industry in both air travel, banking, management consulting, and law, specifically civil rights, which is exciting. So we'll have a great conversation. Next to him is Connie Llanos. Connie is the interim general manager for Los Angeles Department of Transportation. LADOT is the nation's largest second largest municipal transportation agency. And it's notable that Connie is the very first Latina to lead a major city DOT. Thank you. Connie's deeply skilled in policy, strategic engagement, and public affairs, but her real passion, and what she will speak forcefully about in this panel, is focused on creating opportunities for underrepresented communities. Connie began her career as a journalist before joining public service, and she's also had experience as a policy leader for innovative startups in the private sector. Christophe Arnaud is the CEO of Blue Systems, the Balmore Group Smart Mobility Division, and there he leads the development of smart mobility and mobility as a service solutions for cities. Today, Blue Systems smart mobility and smart parking platforms connect more than 50 mobility and infrastructure service providers, and they allow cities and transportation authorities to monitor services and the use of the public right-of-way. Christophe has led a number of clean tech and electric vehicle projects in Europe and the US, including Blue LA's car share service for underserved communities right here in Los Angeles. Christophe got his start in the auto industry, but also coincidentally has experience in the airport industry as well. Next to Christophe is Rakesh Shah. He's the head of Open Innovation for Transport for London. Rakesh leads Transport for London's award-winning market innovation activity, and he works with startups, corporations, academics, and investors to create new value for London. He was responsible for creating T4L's first innovation hub and the resulting pioneering projects that help solve existing city challenges through new technologies that are able to do things quicker, cheaper, and better. Rakesh was previously responsible for T4L's open data program and was actively involved during the 2012 Olympic Games and T4L's response to COVID-19. And then finally, we have Andrew Glass-Hastings. Sorry, Andrew, good to find you again. Andrew has served under 2 Seattle mayors, managed local and regional transportation funding campaigns, led one of the most innovative city DOT teams, and advised cities around the globe. He has extensive experience working at the intersection of the public and private sectors, and now leads OMF as it brings together public and private players to produce open source data standards and software solutions that are essential to digital infrastructure. So we have this amazing and diverse panel, but I warned them that I'm hopefully not going to let them get off too easy. And we'll start with this. 2.5 years after the pandemic scrambled urban travel, household trips have rebounded to or past pre-pandemic levels, but they're trending toward less sustainable rather than more sustainable modes. Auto volumes on major corridors now exceed pre-pandemic levels, while transit ridership continues to languish. And despite a massive disruption, we really didn't meaningfully change the historic trend line. So Connie, sorry, you get the hot seat first. In your perspective, how can we meaningfully change that trend line and make some marked impact in, just say, within the next 2 to 5 years?
Well, good Good morning, by the way. I think we meaningfully change the way we do business. I think for a very long time, we have designed systems with a very narrow perspective on who our target user is and what experience we're trying to create for that rider. We've not looked at the breadth of who we can serve and their needs. So I think we start with fundamentally shifting that conversation. How do we actually collect data in a way that tells us real stories about how people need to use the system so that it can truly create the connectivity we're trying to build out? I think we also have to fundamentally change the way we work as an industry. Right? We've often worked in silos. We work around each other's plans, not with each other's plans, or even trying to consider how we might want to amend a plan. You know, a very well-intentioned, well-researched, data-driven plan. If it doesn't complement the other sister transportation agencies that you're trying to connect to, then what are we really doing, right? So we need to better understand who we're serving and how we meet their needs so we actually make it a comfortable experience they want to opt for instead of when they have the ability to choosing a single occupancy vehicle. And when they don't, then we're just deepening inequity. And we also have to understand that as a sector, and I'm not just saying public sector either, private sector as well, if we are serious about the meaningful goals that we want to achieve, whether it's because of sustainability or equity or profit margin, frankly, we have to start working together.
Great, thank you. So, Rakesh, we often look over at Europe and we think you all have it all figured out, and all we need to do is mimic what you've already accomplished, but we know that's not true. So can you give me, again, we talk a lot about integrating multimodal systems, seamless integration. It's a lot of big words, it's a lot of talk. How are we, give me some concrete examples of what we can do to see a meaningful move in those mobility targets in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be here. I think just building on Connie's points, you know, I've been at Transport for London for 21 years, and my job's always been to encourage people to use public transport or sustainable forms of travel. Well, suddenly, mid-March, a couple of years ago, my job was to encourage people not to use public transport. So culturally, that was an incredible shift. And so as a result, it was a big cultural shift, and then the impact COVID has had on ridership has been drastic. You know, our fares revenue has completely come down. And thirdly, that strategic focus is really hard when you're in a crisis environment. So that sets the context. I think moving forward, we have to ensure that we're focused on a North Star. So in our case, the North Star is encouraging 80% of trips to be made by walking, cycling, and public transport by 2041. It came down quite a bit during the pandemic because people shifted to the car, but we're around 63% now. So we're doing well, but there's much more to be done. We certainly haven't cracked it, but just challenging your earlier statement. But I think there's an opportunity here where when the pandemic happened, we started to think about creating new walkways, new cycleways. They were temporary. And actually with legislation, we managed to navigate through some of that. And as a result, we've seen record riderships on cycling, we've seen record riderships on our cycle hire scheme, and we've had over 2 million rides now on our e-scooter scheme. So suddenly we're able to do things quicker. So I think looking forward now into 2 to 5 years, our ridership levels are around 99% on the weekends compared to the pre-pandemic levels. They're about 70-75% on Monday to Friday. But also what we're seeing is shifts in the trends now, where Tuesday to Thursday, it's quite busy, very busy. But Monday to Friday, we're not seeing the same level of ridership during the day, but in the evening, we're seeing an increased level. So maybe the leisure trips are taking over. I think looking forward into the 2 to 5 year horizon, there's a few things we have to focus on. I think firstly, we have to be customer centric. Sometimes we're too operationally driven by transport planners who are brilliant and they do a great job. But what is it that our end users want? And how do we create a city for all? So that's one. I think the second thing is we talk about sustainability. Well, what does it mean in our context? And in London, we have 850 electric buses, but that's a fleet of 10,000 that we have. So there's much more to be done. We have about 6,000 taxis that are fully electric. And we have about, I think it's about 11,000 charge points, and that's about 32% of the UK's overall charge points. So the infrastructure's there, but there's much more to be done. And a couple of other things I would encourage is we cannot do this alone. We have to bring the private sector in, whether you're a corporate or whether you're a startup. How do we work with you to solve some of these problems? And actually, I'm going to be a bit provocative on the corporates. How do we bring some of your R&D investments to innovate and actually scale some of the solutions? Because sometimes the onus is on the public sector to spend all the money on innovation. We want to work with you, so how do you use us as a test bed? So I think there's a series of things we need to do, but we should be focused on the North Star.
Great. That's great. So Christophe, representing the entirety of the private sector.
Oh, wow. Very honored.
So Rikesh says he can't do it alone. What can the private sector do to help with this integration?
Look, I'm going to jump on your example. You just were about you were finishing your answering with the electrification of London with 11,000 charge points. This is pretty interesting to see how London is today in that interesting position, while actually London and with Transport for London have been at the forefront very early. I mean, in Europe, in 2011, they have started to support the EV uptake. And I have to admit that it was a crazy mess at that time, because it's what we see happening right now in the US. A lot of money is falling here to support EV uptake, to have CNOs, charge point network operator, installing charge point, but actually it has just generated a lot of tech companies to come and to take that money and to install it. And this is literally what happened in London almost 10 years ago. The borough, obviously, it's not TfL is an authority, but London is 31 cities. That's the reality. So every boroughs were actually choosing one charge point network operator. But you want interoperability. You want to have a good user experience. That's what TfL wants. And at the end of the day, they just recognize, okay, we have now 7 different tech providers with 7 different type of charge points. And at that point, actually, even the plugs were totally different from a charge point to the other, so which was kind of a mess. But very quickly, and this is where I think it's very important to all have that in mind, is this money that came was supporting the installation, but not SLAs, not the maintenance. And after 3 years, there were a big complexity in terms of how we can keep this charge point network being working properly, which is happening right now. Everybody, as EV owners, EV people who want to participate to this change into the climate, they are actually super bored to actually see charge points that are not working. So very quickly, it came these things to happen, that we need to have kind of a super operator to oversee the charge point network operator. And it was very interesting because we are back in 2014. There were no data standards, no even possible data maybe. Maybe the charge points were even not really connected. The only thing that was easy, it was one contactless card was giving access to everything. But for having TfL, having the capability to measure, to monitor the SLA, it was impossible. So this is how the tech company, and I've been participating a lot with TfL at that stage to actually kind of deliver a platform that was able, using the data, to streamline the whole process and give TfL and give the authority the possibility to come back to the charge point network operator and say, hey, look, you got a lot of money to that. It must work properly, right? But what was interesting is at that time we had to work with everybody to define which data standard. OCPP, OCPI were not existing at that time. What the OMF is doing today with MDS is about having and streamlining a data standard that can be replicable everywhere so that it's easy for every city. And that's what has been done. And what I think is very important here is that tech companies here are here to enable the city goals in terms of sustainability, safety, electric vehicle uptake, and this is how we can make it happen, by really having all stakeholders around the table, defining standards, and then having that kind of possibility, because we are now living in an era where it's fully digital, so we can be tracked every day. You are all tracked here. You take a Uber, a ride, you are actually entering a parking. We know you are in that parking. We know that you are walking. We know that you are actually entering the airport. Once you are entering an airport, an airport can track you as well until the boarding gate. So we know everything. With sharing all that kind of data, we can enable by resharing with the stakeholders, with the city, so that actually you can achieve a real multimodality that is obviously supporting the goals of the city in terms of safety and sustainability.
Great. So Andrew, Christophe seems to say that being able to have some kind of a data standard is important to integration. Do you know anything about data standards?
Maybe a thing or two. Thanks, Karina. And thanks to CoMotion for the opportunity to be here. I love being in a group like this where I feel at home with the nerdiness and wonkiness of the topics of conversation. So great to be here. And as Karina mentioned at the outset, I lead the Open Mobility Foundation. And the Open Mobility Foundation is an international public-private organization that is led by cities and supported by commercial transportation technology companies like Blue Systems, one of our members, and with the mission of creating open source data standards and software tools to help cities manage mobility with digital infrastructure. And so our organization really exists, and the origin story is right here in the city of Los Angeles, as LA created the mobility data specification. And originally was thinking on down the line towards how is a city going to manage, a city that's responsible for managing traffic in the public right-of-way, how is a city going to do that when vehicles are being driven by computers and not humans? So they were thinking about this need of having a common language, an exchange of data. City being able to not just get data from operators, from companies, but also to be able to communicate policy in a digital format back to those companies, communicate the rules of the road. Well, then someone unexpectedly, shared electric scooters literally arrived on the street, and the city of Los Angeles pivoted the MDS, the mobility data specification, to be that common language to allow them to manage micromobility, manage these scooters. And exactly in that way, across all the different operators, and now across cities around the world, there's a common language that's used for cities to be able to understand the scooter activity, the trips, the locations, and be able to manage, in some cases, very large fleets of scooters across multiple operators with platforms like Blue Systems. And on the flip side, now the cities are able to actually communicate those policies back in this standard digital language around the no-ride zones or slow zones or parking zones or the different types of policies that enable a city to manage micromobility. Now, where did the Open Mobility Foundation come from? We're talking about Los Angeles. The MDS was quickly adopted by cities, not just here in the United States, but around the world, and it became more than the city of Los Angeles wanted to manage on their own. So they got together with some leading agencies, like Miami-Dade County, and Carlos Cruz Casas over here in the corner, the city of Seattle, and Washington, D.C., and others, and formed the Open Mobility Foundation. And now we get the opportunity, the privilege of stewarding this data standard, and working with cities and these private companies and technology in the technology space to really continue to foster this important aspect of common language. And I often think about starting off here a micromobility, but now we're as an organization a few months away from releasing the next version of MDS, which is going to take a giant leap beyond micromobility and allow cities and the private sector to work in partnership to manage other modes, including taxis and services like Lyft and Uber and car share and sidewalk delivery robots. And then you can see kind of where this is going down the line in terms of different modes on the street. We're still talking about right now, we're still kind of operating on the edges here. I mean, we're not talking about personal cars. We're not talking about the lion's share of trips yet. But we're giving cities the ability that to manage these new modes and through digital infrastructure in a way that they haven't had up until now. A lot of the way cities have managed traffic has been through analog means traditionally. But now we know more and more mobility is digitized and has a digital interface. Whether you're using Google Maps or requesting the Lyft trip or actually paying for parking with an app. So much more of our daily experiences around transportation and mobility are digitized. And if cities are going to be able to continue to play their fundamental role as planners, managers, and regulators of the public right-of-way, they're going to need these tools in order to be able to do that. So really excited to continue the conversation.
Yeah, no, this panel is amazing, but Justin, you literally fly, well, not you, but you oversee the group that literally flies above it all. You can leave this chaotic street environment of fragmented different modes behind. Why would you care about terrestrial integration?
Well, it's critical for getting people to and from the airport where they have to get the aircraft. And that's why we're spending billions of dollars, literally a huge part of our $14 billion capital improvement program is dedicated towards revolutionizing the way that people get to and from the airport. The biggest investment that we're making, and we're well on our way, is the automated people mover that we're building that's going to finally connect the airport with the metro system so that people can finally take the train all the way into the airport. So that in and of itself is going to be a revolutionary transportation mode for passengers. But we're looking at lots of other things. We're doing lots of other things to improve the way both passengers and employees get to and from the airport. A lot of push towards high occupancy vehicles, both from a perspective of our new Flyaway 2.0, as we're calling it, is a brand new flyaway solution that is going to not only have point-to-point transportation to and from the airport from certain important points in the city, but also we've set it up so that we can develop a kind of an on-demand system where it is the ability to service multiple other destinations and on an ad hoc basis based upon the need of the passengers. So we're spending a lot of money in that. We're spending a lot of money to develop systems where we're getting employees and ride shares to and from the airport, especially from those areas right around the airport, and also carpools for larger systems. So there's a lot of things that we're doing that are really geared towards changing the way people get to and from the airport. I think everybody always has the problem of traffic to and from the airport, so they know how important this is in making the journey better and making our operations ultimately better as well. And so you will see huge changes in the next 2 to 5 years, the framework you're talking about, in the way people access the airport. And there'll be lots of different options where people don't have to get in a car and drive and park. We're also seeing that all of our major airlines are entering into business ventures with the air mobility companies, the eVTOLs. So that is certainly going to be something that starts to emerge in the next 2 to 5 years. And obviously the airport is going to be a key origin destination point for the eVTOLs. So it'll be very interesting, and we're in the onset of determining how we're going to plan for those to come to and from the airport and scale. And so that's something to be seen as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you're doing really tremendous transformative work there. And you all, I think, have a small event happening in 5 or so years here locally. So
Don't know what you're talking about.
so that's good. So you can really do, don't let a good emergency go to waste, right? To really make those transformative changes. So Rakesh, I want to go back to you for a second. So our mobility system, as I mentioned, is really fragmented. Parts of it are provided by private sector, parts of it are provided by the public sector, parts of it are national, some local. It's really hard to make all of these different players kind of come together, right? If I could give you one superpower that you could do, one authority or one authorization that you don't have right now, what would make the biggest difference for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, giving you London's context, we have an integrated strategy to transport in the city. But similarly to LA, we have private operators, public operators. There are 34 highways agencies in London, and we need to work together. So it's quite a complicated, fragmented approach. But one thing that I would love to have is, how do we create a sandbox where we can remove some regulation, we can remove some of the procurement challenges, the legal challenges, and we can genuinely test things, because the crisis that we have as transport operators are significant. If I just give you some examples, tragically we had 73 deaths on the road network last year. And disproportionately, it was more black kids that were killed than anyone else. So we've got massive social problems there. We've got challenges around air quality and the filthy air that people are breathing in, which is a problem right now because thousands of people are suffering from respiratory diseases. We've got a series of other challenges around people simply aren't walking enough. So we've got challenges with our health service around obesity and type 2 diabetes, simply because people aren't being active. So we've got a challenge there. And also the role that transport plays, and we're all involved with this, is the economic wealth that we could create, particularly now, coming out of the pandemic. It's critical that transport plays its role to create new jobs and to create new economic hubs. So the context there is we've got massive challenges. And having this sandbox, what it allows us to do, it allows us to be more entrepreneurial and allows us to be more commercial and work with some of the best innovators. Because if I think about public sectors, and it's a generalized statement, and there are different exceptions, we worry about risk. You know, we're very risk averse. We worry about failure. I mean, failure is such a bad word in our industry, where as soon as you get something wrong, someone will get tarnished rather than rewarded for trying to push the boundaries. There's challenges around scaling and procurement. So how do we create a test bed where you can spend much more time on defining your problems? And I think part of that is we've started to introduce a notion of design thinking in the team, which in the past we would never have done. As senior leaders, sometimes we spend too much time on the solution. And we challenge each other to say, your solution's not quite right. So we will overprescribe what we want. Either we build it ourselves or we go out to the market with a very clear definition of what we want. I would rather we spend much more time on defining the problem, particularly in the context of an integrated transport authority. And every city is different. We might have the same problems, but contextually will be different. So how do you design that problem based on your context of your city? So that's number one. Secondly, how do you then go out to the market and scout the market and engage effectively with the market to experiment? And within that experiment, whether it's a 12-week experiment or a 2-year experiment, how do you create the right safeguards and the right controls so you can create proper evidence? So I'm not sure if it happens in other cities, but in my case, we talk about the digital twin. I've probably got 20 digital twins in my organization. I don't even know what consistent definition is. So I would love to just do that, you know, within my company. So how do you create the right sort of conditions to experiment and create the evidence? And then finally, how do you create the right funding sources? So if you create the evidence, how do I work with my business planning colleagues and say, you know that 200 million pounds you've put on that project over there? I think we could do it for 150. So put the task on us, and let's work with the market to reduce costs.
Right.
So the power would be create some powers for sandboxing.
For sandboxing, creating a culture for innovation and a climate for innovation. Yeah, it's so critical. So Connie, cities rely on transit. Transit relies on cities. But oftentimes, at least in the US, cities and their transit authorities and their states kind of all act like polite cocktail guests with one another, but they don't really act like the conjoined twins that they really are, needing to move in the same direction, making the same decisions. How can we bring these disparate agencies together for common cause?
Well, you mentioned this small event we're all getting ready for in a few years. And I think one of the greatest potential gifts, if we choose to receive it, is this real timeline and impetus for us to actually work together. So as we're thinking about how to make the LA Olympic Games not only the most successful, but also a car-free games, fulfilling that promise, it requires us to all work together towards a common goal at every level, including at the federal level, right, as we're partnering together. And we're going to access better resources. We're going to have, obviously, better implementation as we collaborate. I think this, if done right, you know, we have this opportunity to actually leverage historic levels of funding to not only create the best 2 weeks for Los Angeles, but to have a generational shift in what we leave behind. But it also proves that we can work together. We can work together to secure grant funding. We can work together to implement new partnerships and pilots even as we're getting ready. So I think that the Olympics has this potential to really give us a goal to work towards together. I also think it's important to celebrate where we are already doing some of this successful work. So one of the great partnerships that we've been able to execute with Metro in the last few years has really been around being partners in creating that increased reliability, speed, for local transportation, for local bus transit, right? Everything from signal prioritization to actually working together to think about where bus-only lanes need to be placed in the city, how we can complement those new design plans with other mobility assets like bike lanes, like bus shelters, really thinking about it from a holistic perspective. We are slowly but surely changing the landscape of LA streets, and we fundamentally could not do that if we weren't working together. And it took us some time, right? There was some bumps and bruises along the way to be able to truly align, but in both of those examples, we've really gotten to a quite seamless partnership with Metro that really does allow us to see some of these real dividends that we're looking to secure. As I think about your first question too, how do we get more people to use the system? I also want to mention that we have post-pandemic seen some places where ridership has not only stayed the same, it's actually grown. I think we've seen that in the transit lines that have really been designed to meet very specific needs. So I think of Pico Union and our dash route there. It was a line that is a community that is dense, that is pretty rich in other mobility options. You have a huge transit-dependent population. We actually never really saw ridership decrease that substantially. And some of that was by need, right? People need to get to frontline jobs. But it's also because that line was designed to meet those very specific needs of that community. I think as we think about how we're going to work together, it's focusing in on how we build out those solutions that I think will be really critical.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Christophe, Rakesh talked about, he had one word in his answer which maybe slipped by a bunch of us, which is funding and money for innovation. So it's one thing to create a sandbox for innovation and to make yourself available as a city or as a place to take down those regulatory barriers to innovation, but it's another thing to really invest in innovation. And can you talk a little bit about, from the private sector standpoint, what is the cost of innovation? How can we be more supportive of that investment, and what is the return then that is possible if we do?
Yes, I have to admit that the sandbox idea is a really great idea, because the reality is that the issue to do innovation, to invest, the very first issue is the different political issues, to align the different authorities, to align the different regulation from 31 boroughs with the regulation on top of it with TfL, and maybe even at the government level. And this is where we have an issue, and this is where the sandbox is actually kind of a gray area where no more regulation, no more competition between boroughs and regulation, because that's what's happening. And we have the same in every cities, because modality transport, it's not attached to one city. People are commuting from a lot of cities. People are coming to LAX, not from LA only, from the whole region. So that's why mobility management needs to be taken as a region level, and this is where you are starting to have issues. What is interesting is that the tech companies today, they are capable to deliver and support all the key goals of the cities. So it's been now years that it's on the table. Everything is possible. We can have an efficient intermodality, which means we can have with the data and bring every data to the one person so that they know how to park and then to take a ride and to go to jump onto the metro and get to the airport. It's possible. Why are we not able to do it? It's always because of issues regarding regulation and politics and alignment, if I may. Having green approach, having sustainable approach, it works because, I'm taking an example in Paris right now. There is 37 cars with some cameras. They are scanning license plates, and they are just checking if this car is allowed to be driven today with regards to the air quality. So which means EV, no tax, And if you have a regular car, you will have to pay something. That's the idea. So having low emissions approach, it's working. It's working in Paris, not working in the neighboring city. Why? Crazy, because this car was coming obviously from the neighboring city. So the key goal actually that not a lot of cities are saying openly, obviously, it must be sustainable, but not only sustainable on a green approach, but financially sustainable. And with what a city can get in terms of visibility from everything that moves, and also the curb that is now connected, it's easy to see when someone is parking. This is how it's working in Paris, obviously, because a license plate is attached to the whole life of a car, so it's kind of a public information. If someone is paying, I know that someone is on the curb. So like you can measure the pressure, so you can have dynamic pricing on this. So you can tax more cars if they are not aligned with the EV goals that the city wants. But what is interesting here, we are talking about rules. The goals of the city is rules. You can digital the rules, and when you have rules, but then you need to enforce. If you are not enforcing, the rules will never be applied. But with enforcement, you are also generating some revenue. Revenue not to be profitable from a city perspective, to have the capacity to innovate, to have the capacity to continue having the right services that is allowing you to make it happen. So, and this is key. So when we are doing a lot of test, trial, things like that, and everything is somehow free, which means that it's not allowing the city to actually get some revenue back, but it cannot be sustainable. So the black box, the sandbox, it's very interesting because we are putting on the side a big issue that is the political alignment. But on top of that as well, the key is to really be also financially sustainably minded to make it happen. And what we were saying, it's always a public and private partnership. What is really interesting is all the private partners that are actually bringing mobility solutions on top of a very expensive public transportation management, very expensive. But once again, the city is offering the possibility to those people to manage and generate revenue on their piece of land. So it's all about digitalizing the permitting as well. You give the possibility to people to do something that you have chosen. I want to have scooters because they are clean. I want to have bike. You in London, you were forcing very quickly all taxis to be electric, which was really, I mean, I saw that in 3 years. It was really amazing. With even a change of the brand with LEVC, which was pretty exceptional from a pure black cap perspective. So the idea is that all those things, taxi, you can digitalize permitting for taxis. You can digitalize the permitting for scooters, for car sharing, so that this is additional revenue that is coming, that is now easy to manage thanks to the data that is now everywhere. So for me, it's important that there is this financial sustainability goals on top of the goals of every city that is clearly safety, green, but every city may have different directions, obviously. And obviously, having the possibility to try without having in mind the complexity of the different organizations, authorities. I mean, an example that is crazy for us in France is the Région Île-de-France, where you have tons of cities. This is the transportation authority. The biggest city within that region, this is Paris, but they have their own authority. And what is interesting is that the region Île-de-France is right-wing and Paris is left-wing. They cannot talk each other. They cannot align. It's never going to happen because if she said A, the other one, which exactly. And this is the same everywhere. So that's why trialing, we can demo because this is what people also want to see. Once we can demo, then we have a proof of concept.
Yeah. Did you want to add something, Rakesh?
Could I just come on one point, because I think it's really good, is we've seen some fantastic digital maturity in the market, but frankly, we don't have the level of same skills within our organization. And there's a shortage of digital skills. So well, who's our future engineer? Who's our future coder? And actually, I'm sure Connie will want to say something. How do we get more diversity from our industry? Because at the moment, we've still got lots of blokes who want to be the engineers. And how do we go out and reach out? And I think it's our duty to provide the access to actually encourage our future engineers to be from wide sections of the community.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Andy.
Can I comment on the sandbox real quick? Because I love the sandbox metaphor. I mean, I think mostly because it's nostalgic of all the hours that I spent like building cities in my sandbox, but literal sandbox. But you know, I'll argue for a second that the sandbox exists. And it's a question of whether does a sandbox actually make sense if Los Angeles has a sandbox, London has a different sandbox, and you know, each city has their own, or I would argue the Open Mobility Foundation is a sandbox. and is a sandbox that is actually a true public-private partnership between cities internationally and the companies that are most interested in partnering with cities around solving these mobility integration solutions. And we've been able to create what is not just a public-private partnership in lip service, but is actually an opportunity to collaborate between the public sector and private sector to develop these collaborative open source data standards and software tools. I want the Open Mobility Foundation to be a skunkworks, to be an opportunity where if you individually, London, Los Angeles, et cetera, can't necessarily pull something off because maybe it's a little bit too experimental, like toss it over to us. This is a perfect opportunity where we have this sort of trusted environment between the public and private sectors to be able to get a little bit more creative and push on things a little bit more than I think we even have in the 3 years that the foundation has existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add, Andrew was talking about LA and sort of how MDS started. It was absolutely in the search of a solution, right, for a very real problem. And we did take on a tremendous amount of risk. And we felt the pains of that risk for quite some time. I think that it's critical, though, as we're having this conversation, that we really call on the private sector to make sure that you're working with us as you're defining the problems you're trying to solve, right? We're all speaking to this idea that we need to partner together, we need to take risks. It is much easier for the private sector to take risks than the public sector. It's just a fact. So help us. If the partnership, the desire to partner is true, then help us. And it starts with, let's work together to define the real problems that cities are trying to solve. And then you go design, give us some ideas about how we can experiment to solve them. And I couldn't agree more that the OMF does give us that opportunity in real time. I mean, the curb data specification to me is a perfect example of that, right? We started with a mobility data spec, but it's through that work that we understand, well, if we can't really digitize our curb, we really don't realize the full potential of MDS, right? That spec is in its infancy. We have this great appetite to have companies come in and help us explore how we can go faster. And as a city, some of the stuff we've not been able to secure funding for, I think, absolutely. I think it goes without saying funding is critical, and it's hard to come by for things that are experimental. For our Code the Curb work, it's been really hard to get steady streams of funding. So what have we done? We've taken the sandbox experiment approach. We are doing pilots with private sector companies, working with the OMF, working with urban movement labs to really try and figure out and test out and have proof of concept, and then hopefully we secure more funding.
Yeah, I want to stay on this funding topic just a little bit and turn to Justin. So airports sit at this kind of interesting interstitial space, or the structure that you are, right? It's a public authority that you get maybe some initial public dollars for capital improvement, but then you have to fund yourself. You have to be self-sustaining, right, from then on. And any of the innovations that you want to fund, that's risk that you assume. That's something that comes from your customers. Can you talk about, is that model, is there anything that we could learn, sort of outside the airport environment, where this kind of self-sustaining authority might help us bridge this gap, or so public agencies can think more like private entrepreneurs, but also really help in the innovation space?
Yeah, airports are very different than other city departments in the sense that we are a proprietary company, and we as airports are very restricted in how we can use the funds that we generate. We have to use them for airport purposes. So yes, our funding is all based upon, for our capital projects, on what we can raise, what we can raise either through rates and charges with the airlines or what we can raise through bonds. And a huge portion of our capital program is being funded by bonds that we go out and sell on the market. So we definitely are self-sustaining in that essence. Of late, the federal government has been very helpful in the bill money and a lot of the COVID funding that has helped us to get through the pandemic, and we're very thankful for that money, and hope to get more. There's more coming from that, and we hope to be able to get our share of that. But it is very important for us in order to be able to make a lot of the progress in these areas to get the participation from the private sector as well. You know, we're currently playing in that sandbox with Connie's team and our team around NDS, and we're working with private companies to help us to get there. But we definitely need more help from the public sector. Needs more help from the private sector to be able to do this. And there are win-win ways that we can do things together by coming up with solutions, proving them in the sandbox, and then allowing both the private companies to go out and distribute that further and make more money. But the important thing is we're finding the ways to make great strides in how we integrate as different departments within city and within regions. So definitely there can be a big help from the private sector on that side.
Great. So I'll warn you all, we'll stop in a minute and take some questions, so start thinking about really, really compelling, tough questions for this panel. They're pretty smart. But before we get to that, I do want to touch on one topic that I know is really important to all of us and all of us here, which is equity. It's a topic that gets a lot of lip service, but again, one where we've had some real challenges in making meaningful difference in it. So there's new research that came out that said transportation insecurity is actually more prevalent than food insecurity, of people not having any resiliency in the way that they move around. If they miss the bus, if their bike has a flat tire, if their car gets booted, they will lose their job or miss the critical medical appointment or have the kids stranded at school. So Connie, I know that this is a passion of yours. How can integrating this multimodal system, all of these different services that are available to us, does it have any possibility to help address this transportation insecurity that exists, and how can we do it?
It's a great question. I mean, when we think about, I've mentioned a couple times this, where the system falls short, right? Oftentimes, in particular for the most vulnerable, when they are completely reliant on our system, and we don't produce the full connectivity for where they need to go, there are huge costs that they pay. They don't necessarily have the option to opt for, calling a Lyft because they need that first mile, last mile solution. In some cases too, depending on who the rider is, accessing a bike is also not something that will meet their needs. So I think as we're thinking about universal basic mobility in Los Angeles, we're adopting it as a North Star. And for us, what that means is we're really looking to ensure that we can close the gap in access to transportation, because you're absolutely right. In Los Angeles, there's somewhere along the lines of 12 times the number of jobs that you can access when you have a single occupancy vehicle than when you don't. But we also saw during the pandemic that those that had to get to work were relying on the system that nobody else was using, right? We saw less decreases in bus ridership and in the areas where we know we had a maximum number of transit-dependent folks. So when we're thinking about closing that gap, we're looking at it from an all-hands-on-deck approach. So our pilot, our South LA Universal Basic Mobility pilot, is not only providing a very real $150 a month in a subsidy for 2,000 residents in South LA to be able to access a menu of options, but we're also ensuring that those options exist. Everything from making sure that you do have dash routes that they can service, that you do have electric car share that they can access, and e-bike libraries that they can access, that they do have the right bus routes that are running as efficiently as possible to actually get them to where they need to go. I think what we need to really think about, I feel like we keep coming back to this conversation, is that it is an all approach, not a bits and pieces approach to really get to the type of access that we're looking for. And I think that is even more critical when you're talking about a city as complex and as large as Los Angeles. You know, if you are someone who lives in Sylmar and you're trying to get to LAX, it's a really long way to go. How do we make it easy? You know, from Watts to Hollywood, right? How do we make it easier? And I think the how is we have to saturate people with choices that actually meet their needs, which also does mean a fundamental shift in how we plan, because we do have to engage people early to make sure that the services we're bringing to them are actually meeting their needs. And that was another fundamental piece of our Universal Basic Mobility pilot. We didn't just decide all of the different services and modes that we were going to bring into this community. We worked with a nonprofit led by Slate Z, which is a South LA organization that works with dozens of other organizations in the community. And the community told us what they needed, how they needed it, and then we went out and got some funding. And it is a beautiful example because there is local funding in that pilot, there is state funding in that pilot, it is community driven. We are partnering with Metro. We are partnering with private sector companies, right? And we're gonna ask them, be a part of this mobility wallet, be a part of the solution. And I think, you know, it'll really sort of test this idea. Will you come and experiment with us if we create the opportunity for you to do so? So we're really excited. Some of those subsidies will hopefully start to roll out at the beginning of next year. And then we will measure and really sort of try to figure out what worked, what didn't, and how do we scale it.
Yeah, no, really excited about it, and I think, you know, the world is watching to see that not every place is LA, and you have some resources and some opportunities to do this that, you know, in small Pittsburgh, maybe we were able to do some of it, but couldn't do all that. Andrew, I'm going to ask you if you can answer very briefly, and then we'll take a question just in the last minute. How are open, interoperable data standards part of the equity agenda?
Oh, jeez. Well, I mean, it's really hard to, I was actually going to take like equity in a slightly different direction, but so
Speak to the dockless equity metrics that we've been able to drive through open data standards.
well, absolutely. There's, I mean, at its core, you know, a tool like the mobility data specification that cities now, we estimate about 300 cities, 21 countries around the world are using to manage their micromobility fleets. You know, they are now able to understand where that micromobility, those trips and that activity is on a day by day, you know, week by week, month by month basis. And so, you know, how do you know whether or not your micromobility system is actually helping to meet or work towards your equity goals? And now there is the ability for cities to have that data from an open source you know, standard like the mobility data specification to be able to see, and often in somewhat nearly real time, are those scooters being used, for example, to fill transit deserts, to actually expand the reach of high capacity transit, knowing that we can't afford or don't have the time to build trains to every neighborhood we want, but micromobility is a way to fill some of those gaps. Or just because a company that is permitted to operate in a city is placing scooters in a neighborhood, are they actually being used? Are those scooters charged? Are those scooters accessible to the communities that they're being placed in? So those are just a couple quick examples of how a standard that a city can use across operators can help really have the information to know whether this is furthering an equity goal or not.
Yeah, great. No, I'll just add that, you know, in building off what Rakesh said, is that for some of the smaller cities, some of the smaller agencies, when you lack having the capacity to do original coding and integration yourself, having an open interoperable standard is fundamental for these smaller places to also take advantage of new innovations and continue to iterate. So we probably have time for a couple questions if there are. Otherwise, I've got loads more to keep going. If someone, any questions for the panel? Yeah, just shout it out. Or is there a microphone? Great.
in the context of public-private partnerships, within new projects, be it office projects, affordable housing, or market rate housing, what are some of the ways you've seen mobility get implemented into those projects in a way that I guess are innovative, that there would be a demand for? An example being easy connection to public transport, I don't know, bikes, anything like that. And then secondly, what would the digitization process look like for permitting? What are some of the variables that would be used, or how would that, what's that concept? And thanks so much.
Yeah. How about if Rakesh wants to answer the first one, and we'll have Christophe answer the second part?
Yeah, so I think with the first one, what we generally find is transit agencies or city authorities are large landowners. And what we need to do is how do we better use that land to support some of our affordable housing agenda? And as a result, I think we need to find creative ways to create, particularly in cities like London, where there's a massive demand for housing, and some of the house prices and the rents are just out of control. How do you make more affordable housing possible for citizens? So I think that's one. And I think the second thing, linking it to mobility, is we've got to provide the right alternatives. You cannot now put lots of car parking spaces there. But to say, what's the public transport options do you have in the area? What sort of cycle routes do you have there? If you do have a car, because you absolutely need one, what's the EV options that you have there? So we've got to think much more long-term, much more strategic, and much more sustainable.
So in terms of permitting, digitization, and real example of public partnership, public-private partnership, this is a reality. I will start obviously with LA. I mean, LA is clearly using the data to permit the operator to operate in the city by having a dynamic way to actually somehow incentivize the operator to be or not to be in some areas across the city. In Europe, we see the data being permitted, but to actually meet the goal of equitability, and they are actually giving subsidies to some trips that are being actually done in some areas where there is a lack or need of additional transportation. Mobility hubs as well, which means there is a focus on having fleets of operator being close to metro station, and if there are enough quantity of that kind of vehicle, bikes or scooters, there is an incentive right away to those private operators that are actually running the bike, and this is all being driven by digitalized rules being used by the city. So really, it's in place, not in every city, but there are a lot of cities that are actually using now a kind of a digital way to permit and also to achieve their goals with rules, digital rules.
Great. Well, as we just wind down the time, we're gonna quickly just go down the line, starting with Andrew and coming this way. So, just if you could just ask one thing of one of the other sectors that are represented on this panel, what would you ask for to kind of advance the work that you're doing in terms of integrating this multimodal system we have?
All right. Well, this is whether it's really germane to the OMF or not. I think it's really important and actually builds off of the equity conversation, and it's kind of a foundation of equity, which is safety. We didn't really have a chance to touch on that today, but I think safety is like a paramount concern around actually putting the pieces together and creating a seamless transportation system. And so this isn't necessarily the responsibility of the public or private, literally is where those two come together, and a shared responsibility for all of us of creating a safer transportation system for all. I mean, right now cities are using MDS to govern the speeds of scooters. There's a technology exists to govern the speeds of cars. That's a big leap, but if you think about what speed represents, if we're serious about safety, if we're serious about Vision Zero, we need to slow cars down, not scooters.
Great. Rakesh, what would you ask of one of your panelists? Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, that's worthy of applause.
I think the conversation on equities, and the points Connie and others made, it really sort of got me thinking. And social inclusion is just a must. We have to design a transport system that's socially inclusive. So that means that you've got the transport that you need, that's the closest to you. It does so it makes the car less attractive. I think secondly, you've got to provide value for money to customers, and they are customers, not passengers. And by that I mean, do you provide more concessions? If you're over 65, do you get free travel? In London, that's the case. Under 23 in full-time education, you get free travel. So how do we design that? Because otherwise, I think the role that transport and social cohesion plays in terms of community is really, really critical. So I think we've got to get that right.
Yeah. Christophe, what would you ask briefly?
Yeah, I mean, from having my private company and tech hat right now, I just want to say that we are enabling the goals of the cities to make it happen. I think there are a lot of people in this room doing similar things, and they are all can really support to have success in having a safer streets, like you were saying. Obviously, having the cities being capable to bring the modality everywhere so that everyone can benefit from intermodality or having a possibility to actually get to their point where they want to achieve their journey. So that's what I would say.
Connie?
I think I'd like to invite the private sector, to your point, Christophe, to continue and think about how they might be able to double down investing in public sector and public really sort of solving our larger problems. You know, I think oftentimes when we're talking about the conversion to multimodal, it's absolutely embedded with really strong focus on sustainability. Being able to choose how you move is an incredible privilege that not everyone has. I think that the marketplace has changed so that a lot of the consumers that private sector companies are appealing to today, right? They want to do business with companies that have these same shared values. So there is a leverage there that private sector has in being able to say, I can build a business based on my values. Well, how do you then come back to the public sector and use those resources you're able to capture in the marketplace to help us solve problems? I think to also help change the shift and the narrative as well. You know, real adoption, getting past that 1% of transit usage as a country, it's going to take all of us sort of speaking to the same reasons why this is necessary. And it's going to take some investments in making sure that it actually serves the purpose so that people can actually use the system.
Right. And Justin, anything you'd ask from your fellow panelists?
Yes, from our side, I think there would be, number one is the continued development of more seamless mobility options for people driven by digital technologies. We got to give the passengers the ability to control seamlessly through their mobile devices. That's going to be key, and to transact their whole mobility structure. Number two would be to continue work with both with Connie and her team, but also the private sector on further development of the MDS and how we can use that to really change the way that we track and manage transportation mobility options throughout the city. And then the last one is continued collaboration in the area of urban air mobility. It's something that's definitely going to be coming, and we need, there's a lot of variables that are still out there, and we're going to require a lot of collaboration between both our departments and many other departments in the city, but also in the private sector. So those are three areas for me.
Yeah. No,
Justin, MDS can help with the aerial mobility too. So.
Thank you so much. I would just ask that you all keep pushing on and keep taking the risks and keep taking the arrows and the slings and you know, making us all better. It's hard work. There's a lot of work to do. It's urgent. It's imperative for the climate, for social equity. So really, thank you for the work you do. Thanks for the panel.